Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fourth and final Thought Leadership in 15 Minutes Masterclass. Most of the thought leadership we see today falls primarily into one of two camps. It's either designed to build profile or to drive business development activity. Of course, good thought leadership should do both of those. Today's masterclass is going to focus very much on the business development opportunities that should arise from a good thought leadership campaign. The theme, as you probably know, is creating great outputs that drive meaningful client conversations. Alongside great outputs, you need great guests, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have Meridian West's Helen Trudgeon join us. You may have seen Helen introduce the first of the three masterclasses, so it's fantastic to have her as a speaker. And Nigel Spencer, Professor Nigel Spencer. Nigel is a professor in education, innovation and professional practice at Queen Mary University in London and an associate fellow at the Saïd Business School at Oxford, at the University of Oxford. He was until 2017 the Global Director of Learning and Development at Reed Smith. Meridian West and Nigel have together created an award-winning piece of thought leadership campaign, driving client productivity and competitive advantage through a more strategic approach to learning and development. I think learning and development is one of those ones that is often seen as sort of just something that you should do rather than having a strategic element and aspect to it. And I think it would be really interesting to hear from Nigel in a moment on how this campaign looked and shaped and what it delivered. So welcome both. Nigel, maybe I'm going to start with you if that's okay. I think it would be really helpful for those that have joined this masterclass today just to briefly explain the campaign that you and Meridian West have created. But before you do, just one small reminder of housekeeping. We do want your questions. Please use the conversation facility to ask those questions, and we'll come to those after about 15 minutes. So Nigel, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the campaign that you and Meridian West have created.
Sure. Thank you very much, Matt. A pleasure to be here today. And yeah, just a little bit of background on what we tried to do, really, as you say, very, very briefly. I think what we were trying to do was to take something that was a big issue. So think about something like where professional service firms headed, and what, as you said, Matt, what could be the strategic contribution? What could be a really important contribution that learning can make in that general direction? And so when I was thinking about that, I was talking with Helen, with Helen's colleague Ben, and with Stephen Newton, and we were thinking, how can we come together as Meridian West and Oxford then to actually create this? So we came up with an idea, and what was the shape of it? What was it looking like? Well, we thought, okay, if it's about this big issue, let's structure it in a way. So we wanted to give it structure, so that there was a message there. So the four main chunks of the papers, as I call them, the chunks. What's the firm of the future look like? The second thing was, well, because that's going to be different, second paper was, how do you lead change towards that? And then papers 3 and 4 were almost what are the consequences for junior career paths and senior career paths. So the thing I guess we tried to do, Matt, right at the beginning, was almost have a logic and a story to the overall aspect of the campaign. And then we also tried to be quite three-dimensional about it. So we thought, okay, there was some know-how, some stuff that perhaps from Nigel and Stephen and Ben's experience and Helen's experience over the last 10 or 15 years we could put in here that's useful for people to know the nuggets. But we thought, why don't we try and build around that some interesting other activities? So we did a launch event where people could come along. We did the papers themselves, scattered over 2 years. We did a series of roundtable breakfast discussions as well, where people could engage in a different way. And then also we did a social media campaign, and Stephen and I used a facility up at Oxford called the Rapid MOOC video with a green screen at the back, a really nice room that we had at the school, to create some little LinkedIn videos that we could use on LinkedIn as part of the social media campaign. And we were having weekly calls throughout that period as well, speaking with Helen and Stephen all the time, and Grace, when she was with the team as well. So what we were trying to do was think about how can we engage in different ways and give people different opportunities, really, Matt? And I think that was, I mean, I'll hand over to Helen probably as well, but that was, for me, it was almost, what's the story? what's a useful, as you said, Matt, different way of looking at it, because learning, to be honest, learning is, in people businesses, learning is the only way you're going to change the business, actually. So learning becomes mission critical if the world is changing outside. So, and I believe that passionately, you probably could just hear in what I said, but that thought of what's the story, what's the angle that we want to give that's slightly a different way of thinking, and then how can we give people different opportunities to engage?
So what's quite interesting there is it's a campaign that had quite a long life to it. I think you mentioned over 2 years. Helen, bringing you into this is how, with a campaign like that, how did it actually manifest itself over a 2-year window? How do you keep sort of engagement going over quite a long period of time, and what kind of impact has the campaign had?
I think what was interesting about this campaign and working in collaboration with Nigel and with Oxford was that it was planned out from the start in terms of working out what the strategic goals were, what we were going to cover, and what as individual organisations we wanted to achieve from it, and also what working together we wanted to achieve from it, which Nigel's already outlined. And from there, I think having that strategy in place of how we were going to put that marketing together, rather than trying to work it out over that 2-year period, helped a great deal. So we created the collateral at the start, which was co-branded. So everything that was sent out was coordinated to get working together. So we would share, Oxford would put data out, we would put information out, using our websites, using LinkedIn primarily as the social media tool, and also creating a microsite that we both had access to that we were able to go out and share. So taking that approach and creating content, not just taking content from the reports itself, which contained really strong visuals that we were able to use on social media to help promote, but also creating additional content as we went through, as they talking to the individuals that were interviewed as part of those research reports. We were able to produce additional information, case studies on those that we could then send out. What we were also able to do, Nigel's already mentioned that we had a shared launch event that was hosted by one of the firms that we worked with on the project, which was great to sort of give it publicity and give it to a wider audience. We originally planned only, I think it was 2 events, but that actually ended up being 8 because the demand and interest in those papers was so great, particularly rolling it out over time, as we were able to build on that and culminating with the Managing Partners Forum event. Generated a great deal of interest. And where we got to was we were able to enter the Managing Partners Forum Awards. It was March this year, which we won for the best use of thought leadership, which was fantastic, a fantastic win.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? I've had a look at the report and the papers that came out of it, and they are absolutely fantastic and really detailed stuff. There is we hear regularly at the moment that there's a real tendency that the consumers of thought leadership, sort of the clients themselves, are preferring more bite-sized content. And I just wonder, Nigel, is the heavyweight report or series of reports, has it had its day?
I think one thing to think about, Matt, which we tried to do with the papers, was how can we make it accessible? And if someone does want to flick through and take something out of them, how can you help them do that? And so Helen, Steve and Ben and I, we sat down and we had a bit of a brainstorm. And what we deliberately did all the way through the papers, if people look, is we put some little box outs all the way through, which were questions you can ask in your firm or questions you should be asking in your firm. And they were aimed at, say, managing partners or heads of learning. So what we were trying to do was offer, in a way, what you've just said, the bite-sized version of a good question you could ask yourself. And I suppose that's me with my coaching background, trying to think of good questions. But on a serious note, it was a way, exactly as you said, of someone looking at, say, the end of the chapter and thinking, okay, there are 3 things I need to think about. So we tried to make them accessible in that way. And that was also the idea, I guess, of doing the LinkedIn videos, which were, say, 3 or 4 minutes, and trying to draw out using some of the visuals, as you said, Helen, which were really good. The team at Oxford really helped us with the nice visuals of some of the concepts, and they were great to make little videos around. So we tried to, again, that was another aspect of it being, that was a different aspect of three-dimensional, I guess, Matt. Longer version, but bite-sized as well, and some key takeaways.
I think we can read from that the full-size report is very much still has a place to play in thought leadership output. Helen, this webinar is looking at how you can use thought leadership to drive conversations with clients. With this particular campaign, how did you use the thought leadership to move those conversations forward with the professional firms?
I think because it was looking at strategic L&D in particular, we were able to use that to go into sort of senior partnership, managing partner levels of firms for having those very strategic conversations, which again, this was helped hugely by being able to speak to them at large events, which then we were able to move on into further meetings with them. And we've actually, as a result, certainly a couple of the firms brought us in to look at their strategic partner development levels. So it's sort of using that, I think, has worked quite strongly to be able to develop those conversations. And certainly, as Nigel mentioned, having those pull-outs and snap-outs makes it a lot easier to focus on individual elements. And again, having the 4 or 5 separate papers made it a lot easier to talk about specific areas that were of real interest to the individuals that you were talking to.
Yeah. Nigel, a successful thought leadership campaign has to obviously demonstrate some kind of knowledge from a firm's perspective, but I think more importantly, it should also be creating strategy propositions, both for the originators of thought leadership, but also for its intended audience. What's the key to unlocking those strategy propositions with thought leadership?
One word I would say there, Matt, is connection. Because I think you need to be connected to the market. If you're the knowledge provider, you need to be connected and relevant. So what is your relevance? How am I actually getting my relevance? Who am I speaking to? Where's my network? Am I looking outwards enough? So I think there's a relevance point there and I think, to be honest, that works both ways, because you're going to bring in it's going to be a good advertisement of your expertise if you're seen as relevant expertise. And also looking inwards, they're going to want to connect with you if they think, oh, that's interesting. Ben and Stephen had something really interesting to say there, or those 3 questions were what we were talking about the Baldwin last week. So for me it's about connection and relevance, Matt, I think.
Fantastic. Helen, is there anything you would like to add there?
I think it's key to actually have information that's not only relevant, but sort of moving towards the longevity as well. So whilst it's important to have research that answers immediate issues and immediate questions, actually being able to look at the longer term as well and bringing that into it, because that's, I think, one of the things we found certainly with these white papers. And also we did some research again with in partnership with Financial Times and Managing Partners Forum on the commerciality or rather the gap analysis between buyers of professional services and the professional services themselves, how they see each other. Now, that was written several years ago, but it's still of relevance because people are coming back to it time and again because they're seeing that there's important information. And again, looking back to the white papers, we're now discussing the future of work, and which is very, very relevant.
If anybody wanted to find these papers, maybe Helen, where would they be able to find them? Are they on the Meridian West website?
They are. I'm glad you asked me that. And we can send out a link to the white papers when we send out the link to this video.
Fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of the first 15 minutes. I think we were very good to catch up on a little bit of time there. I do have a few questions that have come in. The first one I think is particularly interesting. And it isn't necessarily related to the campaign that you did, but Nigel, I think it'd be a useful one for you perhaps to pick up on, and then sure. Helen, your thoughts too, is actually bringing an academic perspective into thought leadership. Can be, I think, really powerful. And we don't always see it, and it's not always the obvious route firms go down to. I wonder, what do firms need to think about if they want to engage academia in thought leadership? What would interest you from your side of the fence to want to get involved in a thought leadership program proposed by a law or an accountancy firm? And are there any limitations to involving academia?
Oh gosh, about 5 questions there.
I know, I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine. It's really good question. I think what you want to be, to Helen's point of being far-sighted and strategic, I think you want to do stuff and be involved with stuff that's going to matter. So you could obviously, there's a lot of stuff around purpose-led organisation, so we can talk about the type of stuff we want to get involved with from that point of view. And again, you know, where my current place at Queen Mary, again, massively embedded in the East End, and you know, with a very diverse student and population here. So I think there's almost the link to your purpose in the sense of what do you believe in, what you want to get involved with. And then I think you want to work with firms, let's just take firms, that, as you said, Helen, are actually wanting to do some hard stuff that actually is really critical, whether it's about, you know, I don't know, diversity in their talent pipelines, or it's about changing the makeup of the leadership group, or it's about getting from position A of where we are now to the different world of what a professional firm will look like in 5 years' time. And they're really up for that, being involved in that journey, and they want to almost go with you on a long-term journey. I think being involved for the long term, I mean, as you said, Helen, this one was 2 years. I think that's really interesting, because you want to, I mean, rather than just do a little kind of really bite-sized something, I think to be involved in actually and see something through on a journey, I think is really quite, that's intriguing and interesting.
And Helen, from the other side of the fence, aren't there limitations, perhaps involving academia that you could perhaps avoid if you went purely down your own route? Or are there conversely some unique advantages that academia can bring to commercial organisations?
Well, I think certainly there are very unique advantages in terms of the intellectual rigour that academia brings to research, which whilst when we're carrying out research, we are obviously very constrained on time, is we need to be producing our research quite quickly, whereas academia will take a longer term view on doing that research. So I think that works quite well, because they're able to look at to step back and look at the bigger picture in a way we don't necessarily do. But at the same time, that can be a negative if you're not aware of those different ways of working within different organizations. So I think what's essential, as I said earlier on, is having a really good structure and plan in place, and making sure that you've got a good relationship with each other, that you can work well together, and that you both understand each other's objectives, which may be very different in terms of what your expectations are. You need common ground, but at the same time, you need to know from the outset what the likely outcomes are going to be.
Nigel, it's often said that thought leadership should change a business. Do you actually see that happening with thought leadership programs? Or maybe you perhaps may not see such a broad range that maybe Helen or I have done, but in the campaign that you were involved with Meridian West, has it affected change in organisations?
I think what we were really pleased about, and I think one of the reasons we were fortunate enough to win the award, was actually we did a lot of measurement, actually, Matt. So we measured many things. We measured I remember we had a nice map in there. We measured downloads globally. We measured the global impact was, and from the conversations we had, the more qualitative type analysis we did, it was very nice. I think we included one in the award entry that said, you know, from one talent partner in a firm saying, actually, I've never thought of using learning in some of the ways you suggested in the paper, and absolutely it's going to become much more of a board level conversation now. And so it was very nice to hear that it did help people, I think, Matt, reframe slightly, as you said right at the very beginning of the session, how you could use OD and learning inputs in a very strategic way.
I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? The power of anecdotal feedback in thought leadership campaigns it shouldn't be underestimated, and it can be time consuming to collect that anecdotal feedback, but well worth doing. Helen, one of the things, a question that's come in is on longevity into campaigns. I think a campaign that lasts over 2 years is quite impressive. And I just wonder if you've got any tips on how firms can build longevity into a campaign, even if maybe extending it by a few months, if not a few years.
One of the ways that we've been approaching more recently is to introduce pulse surveys. So and build that into part of your thought leadership campaign. So if at the starting point, create your benchmark research of what you're looking at overall, and then over the following month, 2 months, 3 months, but sending out pulse research surveys that can really tap into the current what's happening in the situation at the moment, and then that can feed back into the benchmark survey. So you're always referring back to where your starting point, but feeding in new current information as the situation changes, which currently I think is essential. And I think because of where we are now, that's why we're seeing this.
Helen, just to add on that, I think that worked really well in a couple of the round tables. I remember we threw in further data and discussion points in that, and I think people really found that really helpful, and also that drew further audience and conversation out, Matt, as well.
Did you, Nigel, with this particular campaign, was that longevity designed into the campaign from the outset, or was it something that sort of evolved as the campaign started to roll out?
It was always envisaged. We wanted to spread the work over a couple of years because the papers are quite, for anyone who's looked at them, they're quite chunky bits of work, and there were lots of faculty we wanted to engage in to have little columns of expertise and points of view in papers. So, and lots of interviews we knew we needed to do to capture those as well. So it was always intended to be long. I think what came off of it in different ways. We always, as Helen said, intended to do different aspects like the roundtables, but they grew. And also, as everyone will see on the website when Helen sends the microsite round, there are a few little separate interviews that we did off the back of it as well that were almost like mini, and there's a podcast on there as well. So there were different little activities that following audience interest that we created. But I think that we had a sort of core idea of what the story could look like, and then we just built some of the resources around it, really, Matt, and tried to be creative.
It's important, isn't it, Helen, to actually invest time in that planning stage in any thought leadership campaign?
It's essential, because if you don't know at the start where you're going to end up or where you're heading for, it makes it very, very difficult to control your thought leadership campaign, because it doesn't have a clear focus and you don't have a clear focus of what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, having a clear structure at the outset and allowing for new elements to come in, as we did, I think is also a useful thing to have.
We had
just to add in on there as well. So I think this we've touched on probably in lots of the replies and the to and fro here is communication. But we had a call over that whole period. We had a call every Tuesday morning, and I reckon we had probably 80% attendance on that call from both sides. And keeping that communication flow, what were we hearing from people we were speaking to? What might be an extra idea to build into it? I think that rhythm of communication is really critical, just before I forget.
No, and
I would agree with that.
And I think that's quite an interesting internal engagement tool that firms, the BD teams and firms themselves could use with their own fee earners when developing and building campaigns, because actually one of the challenges we often hear is getting internal buy-in and maintaining that engagement within a firm is challenging. We had one final question, and I think this is quite an interesting one, came in advance, is since the onset of COVID in March when we went into lockdown, have we seen any change in the relationship? And this is not strictly a thought leadership question, but interesting nonetheless, have we seen any change in the relationship between the marketing and BD teams and fee earning teams? For example, fee earners placing much greater, or do they have much greater reliance on their BD teams? Are they turning to them for advice and guidance? And the thought leadership angle is that being reflected in thought leadership campaigns that you're seeing? And I think maybe Helen, why don't we kick off there with you, and then Nigel chip in as well.
Yeah, we've had discussions in our leadership forum roundtables. This has come up several times. And what firms have been reporting and finding is that fee earners have been increasingly going to the BD team and asking for help with how do they talk to clients, what other ways can they engage with them that's outside their normal technical, because they know they need to keep in touch. So they're trusting their BD teams more, asking them for advice and information, and BD teams can come back and say, well, here's some thought leadership that you can use. So it's being able to use it to have those conversations, and it's reporting to be very, very successful. And they're even going to the extent of allowing the business development people to go out and talk to clients in some cases, which in, I think, these firms had previously been unheard of. So yeah, it's been successful.
Nigel, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I was just going to say it's interesting, and I think what it's driven us all in this world we're literally, as of this session as well, living through today with this sort of format, is how do you connect with clients? And I think helping the fee earners, helping the lawyers and the leaders connect with their clients in different ways and be creative around that, I think is an enormous role that I know many BD teams I've spoken to have been helping with. And I think never underestimate as well, you know, that client feedback statistic that's often said where if you about 70% of firms think that, you know, they're doing lots of client feedback, and then when you speak to the clients, the percentage is less. So that whole thing of what is the perceived connection with the client from inside and think, oh, we're doing a lot. Actually, my learning from that is you could do more. So turning the dial up in that connection, whether it's with the BT teams, as you say, Helen, and almost leveraging the whole firm to actually be part of the task force that actually connects with the outside world, I think is a real big opportunity that I've seen some firms doing as well, Matt.
And that's sorry, Matt, but that picks into as well what, Nigel, from what you've said, the 70% figure, I think is quite an interesting one, is that firms do need to do a lot more about their metrics and how they're measuring that engagement, so that you can measure the success of it from a marketing and business development perspective, of being able to show your true value to the firm, of actually saying, this is what we're doing and this is how we're winning business for you.
Yeah.
Do you know, I think in summary there, it's never been a better time to be in professional services marketing, but measure, measure and measure. That brings us to the end of this fourth 50 masterclass in thought leadership in 15 minutes.